Hey guys, in today's video, I will share a stunning story about a near-death experience that revealed surprising details about a global event scheduled for October 2024. Get ready for a journey of overcoming faith and transformation. Before we start, let us know in the comments which city you're watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any impactful stories like this. Let's go together on this journey full of mysteries and revelations. Hello, my name is Leopold Wittenbach. I was born and raised in Baden-Baden, a charming little town in southern Germany. You know those postcard cities? That's right. Baden-Baden is like that, with its famous thermal waters and mountains that seem to embrace us. But look, not everything in my life was as beautiful as the landscape of my city. I lost my father very early. I was only 2 years old. It was in 1971, a terrible accident that took him away and left a silence in our house that seemed to have no end. Growing up without a father is not easy, you know. It's like there's a hole inside you, something missing that you don't even know exactly what it is, but you feel like it should be there. My mother, Anna, did everything possible and impossible for me. She's one of those strong women, you know, the kind that we look at and think, how can she handle it? But no matter how strong she was, the subject of Dad was taboo at home. There was no photo, there was no story. It was as if he had never existed. This really affected me as I was growing up. At school, I saw other boys with their parents and I felt envy that hurt my chest. I kept imagining what it would be like to have someone to teach me how to ride a bike, to take me fishing, those father-son things that we see in movies, you know? As I got older, this lack turned into other things. It became insecurity. It became a fear of getting close to people. I always thought that everyone would leave at one time or another. So why hold on, right? I ended up getting married. Can you believe it? It lasted 3 years. When my ex-wife left, I felt like the last bit of ground had been ripped out from under my feet. The divorce left me devastated. It wasn't just that I had lost the person I loved. It was more like I had failed again in trying to build something solid in my life. That's when everything fell apart once and for all. I went into a severe depression. I isolated myself from everyone. My friend Marcus, poor guy, did everything he could to help me. He even offered me a room in his house, but I could barely get out of bed. The world outside, it didn't even exist for me anymore. And that's how I reached the lowest point in my life. Me, Leopold, at 53 years old, without a father, without a wife, without the will to live. But it was precisely at this rock bottom that something unbelievable happened. Something that completely changed the course of my story, and that's what I want to share with you now. I'm going to tell you about the day that changed everything in my life. It was a day like any other, at least at first. I was at Marcus' house, my friend who had taken me in when I was at rock bottom. I hadn't left my room for days. I barely ate. I barely slept. Depression had taken over me in a way I couldn't even explain. That afternoon, I was lying in the dark. As usual, when I suddenly felt incredibly thirsty. It was like my throat was on fire. I tried to ignore it, but the thirst only increased. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to get up to go to the kitchen and get a glass of water. It seems like a simple thing, doesn't it? Get up and go to the kitchen. But for me, in that state, it was almost an impossible mission. My legs were weak, my whole body hurt. I barely remembered the last time I had eaten anything decent. Still, I forced myself to get up. I left the room staggering, supporting myself against the walls. I arrived in the kitchen after what seemed like an eternity. The light coming through the window hurt my eyes. I dragged myself to the sink, trying to focus on the goal, getting water. That's when it happened. Suddenly, everything started spinning. It was as if the ground had disappeared from beneath my feet. I tried to hold on to the sink, but my hands wouldn't obey. I felt my body falling, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. The impact with the kitchen floor was the last thing I felt before everything went dark. But what came after? Well, it's something I'll never forget. Suddenly, it was like I was floating. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I had, and saw myself there, lying on the kitchen floor. But I was also on top. It's difficult to explain. It was as if I was looking at myself from outside my body. At first I was terrified. I thought, that's it, I died. But then, a strange feeling came over me. It was a peace I had never felt before. All the pain, all the anguish I had carried for so long, just disappeared. I floated there, looking at my body on the ground, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the weight of depression, free from painful memories, free from everything that held me back. But this peace was short-lived. Soon a darkness began to envelop me. It wasn't scary, but it was intense, as if it was pulling me somewhere. And that's when I saw it. A light. A light so bright and so beautiful that it is difficult to describe in words. It was as if that light was calling me. I felt an immense desire to go towards her, and that's what I did. Or rather, that's what happened, because I wasn't really moving. It was more like the light was attracting me, pulling me towards it, and that's how the most incredible and transformative experience of my life began. A journey that took me beyond life and death, and that completely changed the way I see the world and myself. As I approached that intense light, something incredible happened. The light began to take shape. At first it was just an outline, but little by little it became clearer. And then I saw her. It was the Virgin Mary. Now, I know what you must be thinking. Leopold, are you crazy? What do you mean, the Virgin Mary? Look, I understand. If someone had told me this before, I wouldn't have believed it either. But what I felt at that moment, I can't explain it with earthly words. Her presence was overpowering, but not in a scary way, you know? It was as if all the love in the universe was concentrated there, in that figure. She looked at me and, my God, that look, it was as if she knew every little piece of my soul. I felt completely exposed, but at the same time, completely accepted. All my flaws, all my fears, all my pain, everything was there, visible to her. And even so, the love that emanated from her did not diminish. On the contrary, it seemed to grow even stronger. Maria didn't speak to me with words. It was more like we were communicating directly from soul to soul. She showed me scenes from my life as if we were watching a movie. I saw my childhood, those moments when I felt so alone, so lost without my father. You know that feeling of emptiness I carried? Well, she showed me that that wasn't the end of the story, that there was a greater purpose behind it all. And then, to my surprise, she showed me my father. I had never seen a photo of him. I didn't know what he looked like, but there, at that moment, I saw him. He was watching me from afar, with a look full of affection. It was like a huge weight lifted off my chest. Maria made me understand that my father's absence should not define me, that I had strength within me, a strength I never imagined I had. She showed me that I wasn't alone, that I never had been. Then, she took me through more recent moments in my life, the end of my marriage, depression. All of this passed before my eyes. But now, I saw these things from a different perspective. There were no longer failures or defeats. They were lessons, growth opportunities. Maria taught me about love. It showed me that true love doesn't disappear, it transforms. That even when we lose someone, love is still there in a different form. And that the most important thing was to learn to love myself, to forgive myself. You know, I always thought that forgiveness was something we gave to others. But there, at that moment, I understood that the most important forgiveness is the one we give to ourselves. Maria showed me all the times I was too hard on myself, all the times I blamed myself for things that were beyond my control. And then, she did something I will never forget. She hugged me. It wasn't a physical hug, of course. It was more like my entire being was enveloped by that unconditional love. In that moment, I felt truly at peace for the first time in my life. But the journey was not over. Maria smiled at me, a smile full of compassion and wisdom. And then, she pointed to something beyond her. There was another presence approaching, an even more powerful presence. When I think about that moment, my heart still races. After the encounter with the Virgin Mary, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. But I was mistaken. The approaching presence was so intense that it was almost difficult to bear. It wasn't something I could see with my eyes, if I still had eyes in that state, but I could feel it. It was an energy that emanated compassion, wisdom, and a love so deep that it hurt. And then I knew. It was Jesus. He was not a figure like we see in paintings or in churches. It was more a light so bright and so welcoming that it made me cry. Yes, I cried. Even in that spiritual form, I felt tears streaming down my face. Jesus didn't need to say anything. His presence already communicated everything. It was as if every fiber of my being was being bathed in a light of understanding and total acceptance. All the mistakes I had made, all the times I had doubted, all the nights I had spent feeling alone and abandoned, all of it was enveloped by a love I didn't even know existed. And then, Jesus showed me something incredible. He presented me with two possible futures for myself. At first, I found myself continuing down the path I was following before that experience. I found myself sinking deeper and deeper into depression, isolating myself from people, losing the will to live. It was painful to watch. I saw the sadness in my mother's eyes, the concern in my friends. I saw years passing by and I was simply existing without really living. But the second future, my God, it was so different. In him I saw myself surrounded by light. I found myself smiling, something I hadn't done in so long that I had almost forgotten what it felt like. I saw people around me, people I was helping in some way. I saw purpose in my eyes. I saw peace in my heart. Jesus said nothing, but the message was clear. The choice was mine. I could continue on the path of darkness, or I could choose the light. And at that moment, looking at those two possible futures, the choice seemed obvious. I chose the light. As soon as I made that choice, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It was like I was breathing for the first time after years of suffocating. The feeling of freedom was indescribable, but Jesus was not finished. He had something more to show me, something that went far beyond my own life. Suddenly, I saw images of a not-so-distant future, October 2024. I saw changes happening all over the world. They weren't just physical changes, they were spiritual, social transformations. It was as if all of humanity was undergoing a collective awakening. Jesus showed me that these would be challenging times. I saw conflicts. I saw pain. I saw fear. But I also saw hope. I saw people coming together in a way that had never happened before. I saw love overcoming hate. I saw compassion overcoming selfishness. And then I understood. I had a role in all of this. My mission wasn't just to change my own life, it was to help other people prepare for what was to come. Jesus didn't give me specific details about what would happen, but he made me understand that each of us had an important role to play. After showing me those visions of the future, Jesus began to guide me through a review of my life. It was like watching a movie, only I wasn't just a spectator. I could feel it all again, every emotion, every thought. We start at the beginning. I saw my birth. I felt the joy of my parents. I was able to see my father for the first time, holding me in his arms, with tears in his eyes. It was such a powerful moment. I could finally feel his love for me, something I always doubted existed. Then came the difficult times, my father's death, the silence that settled in the house. I could feel my mother's pain, the weight she carried trying to be strong for both of us. It was as if I could understand, for the first time, why she never talked about my father. It wasn't a lack of love or consideration for me. It was a pain so deep that she didn't know how to deal with it. I saw my school years, the moments of loneliness, the times I felt different because I didn't have a father. But now, with this new perspective, I could also see the people who were there for me, teachers who tried to help me, friends who invited me to play. At the time, I was so focused on what I lacked that I couldn't see what I had. Jesus showed me how these experiences had shaped who I was, how the pain of loss had made me more sensitive to the pain of others, how loneliness had made me value true friendships. Then we come to my romantic relationships. I saw my marriage, the happy moments, but also the mistakes I made. I could see how my fear of abandonment, my insecurity, had affected my ex-wife. It was painful, but necessary. I understood that the end of the marriage was not a failure, but an opportunity for growth for both of us. The hardest part was reliving the last few years, the depression, the isolation. But even there, Jesus showed me moments of light that I hadn't noticed. Marcus' affection offering me his home, my mother's calls that I ignored, but which showed that she still cared. Throughout this review, Jesus did not judge me. There was no condemnation in his eyes, only understanding and love. He made me understand that every experience, every mistake, every success had its purpose, that this was all part of my journey. And then, we arrive at the present moment. I saw my body lying on the floor of Marcus's kitchen. But now, instead of feeling hopeless or afraid, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for this opportunity to see my life with new eyes, to understand my journey in a deeper way. Jesus then looked at me, and without saying a word, made me understand that it was time to return, that my journey on earth had not ended, that I still had a lot to do, a lot to live. I confess that I hesitated for a moment. There, in that presence of unconditional love, I felt at peace like never before. But I understood that returning was necessary, that I had a mission to accomplish. And so, with a heart full of new understanding and new purpose, I prepared to return to my body, to begin a new phase of my life. Returning to my body was an experience, intense, to say the least. It's hard to explain exactly what it was like, because there's nothing like it in our normal experience. It was like I was diving back into physical reality. I felt a tug, as if something was pulling me back into my body. At first, it was a little scary. It was like I was being squeezed, forced back into a space that felt too small after having experienced that freedom. When I entered back into my body, the first thing I felt was pain. A lot of pain. The cold kitchen floor, my body sore from the fall and the weakness of the last few days, it all hit me at once. It was quite a shock after that experience of absolute peace and love that I had just had. I opened my eyes slowly, the light bothering me. The first thing I saw was my mother's face. She was sitting next to me, holding my hand, her eyes red from crying. When she realized I had woken up, she let out a sob of relief. "Leopold," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank God you woke up. I was so worried." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. I then realized that I was no longer in Marcus' kitchen, but in a hospital room. There were tubes and machines all around me, beeping and monitoring my vitals. A doctor entered the room shortly afterwards. He started examining me, asking questions, checking my reflexes. I responded mechanically, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Mr. Wittenbach," the doctor said, "you were very lucky. You were unconscious for 3 days. We feared the worst." 3 days? To me, it seemed like just a few minutes. Time clearly worked differently in that other dimension, for lack of a better word. As the doctor talked about severe dehydration, malnutrition, and other medical terms, I looked at my mother. For the first time in a long time, I actually saw her. I saw the worry lines on his face, the tiredness in his eyes, and I felt a wave of love and gratitude that almost made me cry. When we were finally alone, I was able to speak. "Mom," I said, my voice hoarse, "I'm sorry for everything." She squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. "There is nothing to apologize for, my son. I'm just glad you're okay." In that moment, I felt a connection with her that I had never felt before. It was as if all the barriers that existed between us had dissolved. I wanted to tell her everything, about the experience I had, about her father, about everything. But something told me that this was not the right time. In the days that followed, as I recovered in the hospital, I began to notice changes in myself. The depression that had consumed me for so long seemed to be gone. In its place was a sense of peace, of purpose. I looked out the hospital window and saw the world through different eyes. The colors seemed more vibrant, the sounds clearer. It was like I was truly alive for the first time. But along with this new appreciation for life also came a sense of responsibility. I knew I came back for a reason, that he had a mission to accomplish, and although I still didn't know exactly how, I was determined to stick to it. After a week, I was finally released from the hospital. Returning to the outside world was interesting, to say the least. It was as if I was seeing everything for the first time. Marcus came to pick me up. When I saw him, I felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost knocked me over. Without him, without his friendship and generosity, I probably wouldn't be there. I hugged him tight, something I had never done before. "Hey, calm down," he said, laughing, but I could tell he was emotional. "Good to see you up, friend." On the way home, I watched the streets of Baden-Baden as if I had never seen them before. The trees, the buildings, the people walking, everything seemed so alive. I found myself smiling for no apparent reason. Marcus glanced at me sideways. "You look different," he commented. "Did something happen?" I hesitated. How to explain? How can we talk about an experience that challenged everything we consider normal? I decided it wasn't the time yet. "Let's just say I gained a new perspective," I replied. When we arrived at Marcus' house, my mother was there waiting. She had tidied the room for me, put fresh flowers in a vase. The gesture touched me deeply. In the days that followed, I began to reorganize my life. The first thing I did was seek professional help. Even with my new perspective, I knew I needed support to process everything that had happened and to deal with the years of depression. I started taking better care of myself, eating healthier, exercising. Every bite, every step, was a celebration of the life I had almost lost. Little by little, I started getting back in touch with people. I called old friends, apologized for being away. Most were surprised but happy to hear from me. I realized how many people actually cared about me, something I had been unable to see before. One of the hardest, but also most important, things was talking to my ex-wife. I apologized for my mistakes. I thanked them for the good times we had. It was not an attempt to get back together, but to make peace with the past. It was an emotional conversation, full of tears. But in the end, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But the most significant change was in my relationship with my mother. For the first time, we actually talked about my father. She showed me old photos, told me stories. He cried a lot, and so did I. It was painful, but also incredibly freeing. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about him sooner," she told me. "It was too painful." "I understand, Mom," I replied, holding her hand. "You don't need to say sorry." As the days passed, I began to feel a growing urgency. The revelation about October 2024 was always in the back of my mind. I knew I needed to do something, prepare myself somehow. But how? I started reading a lot. Books on spirituality, philosophy, psychology, anything that could help me better understand what had happened to me and what was to come. I also started meditating. In the beginning, it was difficult. My mind was always agitated, full of questions. But over time, I learned to quiet my thoughts, to connect with that peace I had experienced during my NDE. And it was during one of these meditations that I had a clear idea of what I needed to do next. It was time to share my story. Deciding to share my experience was not easy. For a long time, I kept everything to myself. I was afraid of what people would think, afraid of being called crazy or a liar. After all, a story about encountering the Virgin Mary and Jesus during a near-death experience isn't something you hear every day, is it? I started slowly. First, I told my mother. I chose a calm day. We had a picnic in the garden. As we ate sandwiches she had prepared, I started talking. At first, she looked at me with a confused expression, but as I told her, her eyes filled with tears. When I got to the part about seeing my father, she started openly crying. "Oh, Aunt Leopold," she said, holding my hand. "I always knew he was watching over you." Her reaction gave me courage. In the following days, I told Marcus and a few other close friends. Reactions were varied. Some were skeptical, others fascinated, but everyone listened to me with respect, and that meant a lot to me. Then one day I received an unexpected invitation. A friend who had heard my story asked me to speak at a small support group for people who had been through traumatic experiences. I was nervous, but I accepted. That night, I walked into a room with about 15 people. Unknown faces looked at me curiously. I took a deep breath and began to tell my story. I talked about my childhood without a father, about depression, about the moment I fell in Marcus's kitchen. And then, I spoke about the light, about Mary, about Jesus. I spoke about reviewing my life and vision for the future. When I finished, there was silence in the room. For a moment, I was afraid I had made a mistake. But then, a woman raised her hand. "Thank you for sharing this," she said, her voice breaking. I also had a similar experience. I never told anyone because I thought they would think I was crazy. Suddenly, other people started talking. Some had had NDEs. Others had had profound spiritual experiences during moments of crisis. It was as if my story had opened a door, allowing them to open too. I left that meeting feeling light, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. And more than that, I felt like I had found a purpose. Over the next few weeks, I was invited to speak at other groups, small meetings at churches, support groups at hospitals, even a talk at a local university. After that first time I shared my story in the support group, I knew I had found a way to help others. It wasn't anything grand or flashy, but it was meaningful to me and the people around me. I started attending this support group regularly, not as a speaker or anything like that, but as an ordinary member. I shared my experience when I felt like I could help someone, but most of the time, I was there to listen, to offer a friendly shoulder, a listening ear. In my daily life, things have also changed a lot. I went back to work, but with a new attitude. My work as an accountant, which previously seemed monotonous and meaningless, was now an opportunity to help people in a practical way. I started offering free financial advice to people struggling. Nothing formal, just after-hours conversations, tips for those who were in trouble. At home, my relationship with my mother grew stronger and stronger. We spent a lot of time together, talking about the past, about my father, about life. She told me stories from her youth that I had never heard before. We laughed together, we cried together. It was as if we were making up for lost time. I also started to become more interested in nature. He took frequent walks in the mountains around Baden-Baden. Every tree, every flower, every bird seemed to have a special meaning now. Sometimes I took other people with me on these walks, not to talk about my experience, but simply to share the beauty of the world around us. As time went by, I noticed that people started looking for me to talk, to ask for advice, not because I was some kind of guru or sage, but because they felt they could trust me, that I would listen to them without judgment. And so, without making a fuss, without attracting attention, I lived my life with a new purpose. Every small act of kindness, every word of comfort, every smile shared, it all seemed to have a weight, an importance that I had never realized before. But in the back of my mind, that revelation about October 2024 was always present. As the months passed and we approached that date, I felt a mixture of anxiety and expectation growing inside me. We are now in the middle of 2024, and the date revealed to me during my near-death experience is approaching. It's a strange feeling, you know? Living with the knowledge that something important is about to happen, but not knowing exactly what. Over the past few months, I have dedicated myself to preparing as best I can. not in a grand or dramatic way, but through small daily actions. I started practicing meditation and prayer more. I don't follow any specific religion, but I feel that these practices help me maintain a connection with that experience I had, with that unconditional love I felt. I've also been making an effort to be more mindful in my interactions with people. I try to really listen, really see each person I talk to. It's surprising how a simple act of mindfulness can make a difference in someone's life. At work, I started encouraging my colleagues to be more supportive of each other. We organize small charitable actions, nothing too elaborate, just ways to help our local community. It's rewarding to see how these small actions can create a more positive and collaborative environment. At home, I've been talking a lot with my mother about the future. I don't go into detail about what I saw, so as not to scare you, but I talk about the importance of being prepared for changes, of being resilient. I confess that sometimes I feel scared. What if I got it wrong? What if nothing happens in October? But then I remember that look in Jesus' eyes, that unconditional love, and the fear dissipates. Whatever lies ahead, I know we are not alone. Recently, I started to feel a greater urgency. It's like something inside me is telling me that time is running out, that we need to be ready, not for the end of the world or anything like that, but for a change, a transformation. I have encouraged people around me to be kinder to each other, to value their relationships more, to take better care of themselves and the world around them. I'm not talking about October 2024, but I'm trying to convey the message that every moment is precious, that we need to live with more awareness and compassion. As the days pass and October approaches, I feel a mix of emotions. There is anxiety, yes, but there is also hope. Hope that whatever lies ahead will lead us to a better, more compassionate, more united world. I don't know exactly what will happen in October. I don't know if it will be a single, dramatic event or a series of subtle changes. I don't know if it will affect the whole world at once or if it will start small and spread. What I do know is that I'm ready to face whatever comes with courage and love, ready to help anyone who needs it in any way I can, ready to be a beacon of hope in what can be challenging times. And while I wait, I continue to live each day with gratitude and purpose. Because if there's one thing I learned from my near-death experience, it's that every moment is precious. Every interaction is an opportunity to make a difference. So here I am. Leopold Wittenbach, 55, accountant from a small town in Germany, waiting for something that I can't fully explain, but that I feel deep in my soul. I'm not a prophet. I'm not a spiritual leader. I'm just an ordinary man who has had an extraordinary experience and is trying to live as best he can with the knowledge he has received. And as October approaches, I wonder, what does the future hold? What will the world be like after that date? Only time will tell. But whatever it is, I am ready to face it with courage, love, and hope.